this is Rihanna May, aka Miss Devious, coming back to react for you on the topic, will being child-free make you happy? So this is kind of important and relevant in my circle and in my group, in my age group. All of my friends do have kids. I'd say almost every single last one, and I might be the only one without children. So this comes up often, and I think there's a lot of pressure and from society and families and this expectation from other people that in order to have this fulfilled, completed life, you've got to both be married and or have children or some variant of that. So I'm interested to see what they've got to say about it.
I honestly believe that I will never regret choosing not to have children.
It's potentially the biggest decision you'll ever have to make.
We are not allowed to say that motherhood is boring.
But what if, like me, being a parent is something you're just not sure about?
So I think within particular cultures that it really is a big thing. I think there's status involved in being a mother.
Global fertility rates have almost halved since 1950, and the world could be facing a baby bust.
If people don't want to have children, that is, if people don't think that our society is worth perpetuating,
Right.
What have we done wrong?
With my future happiness on the line and my body clock ticking, what are my options?
I'm happy that my children are alive, but I regret the price I had to pay in order to raise them.
I've heard this from a lot of my female friends who are parents and my male friends, that if they had sort of known what direction we were going in, they probably would have thought about it harder. Not that they regret having the current children they have, but just that maybe they wouldn't have had as many or any at all.
But I regret the price I had to pay in order to raise them.
Every year, roughly 130 million people are added to the Earth's population. And as a woman in my late 20s, good job, happy relationship, living in London, I feel like I'm under enormous pressure to be adding to that total.
My children certainly make me very happy.
It makes me so happy. Happy in so many different ways.
I can genuinely say absolutely super happy as a mum.
I think for me the thing is that you're just giving yourself to something beyond yourself.
It's a different kind of fun now, and I had a lot of the other kind of fun in my 20s, early 30s.
It's definitely more meaningful. Your life feels fuller.
I'm not saying that it's not a struggle. I'm not saying it's not hard. I'm not saying there's like really ups and there's really bad lows sometimes, but I think that's with anything in life. Whether you've got children or you don't have children, you go through all of those struggles anyway. So, but with children, I think it's amazing.
Happy parents might say one thing, but how about those closest to me?
That part. The people that are close to you?
Happy parents might say one thing, but how about those closest to me?
I, right now, really don't have a desire to have children.
Whenever I picture my future, I always picture myself as like...
Have you ever been asked, what's your choice? Are you going to have children or are you not?
No, it's always been when. It's always been when.
Yeah, when?
My mum will call me and she'll be like, oh, Nana asks when you're going to have a baby again.
Yeah, my nan does this all the time. She's like, when can I get the hat out of the box and when are we having a great grandchild?
Yeah.
Good luck now.
I'm very aware of my body clock.
It completely makes a difference where you are.
The comments and the questions kill me.
Yeah, good luck now.
I'm very aware of my body clock.
It completely makes a difference where you are, because like, I've got friends up north that are all married and settled down, and kids is like very much on the agenda, and it's the done thing. And
I think I've always known that I've wanted children, but I also have a career that I love, and I'm just not ready for it at all.
It's a real luxury to be able to do just just be a parent.
But I think that's the thing. It's just not possible to have it all.
Clearly not everyone.
Is it possible to have it all? I think so.
Everyone feels the same. I'm only one tiny part of a hugely diverse population. But speaking to my best friends got me thinking, what if I don't ever want to have children? Surely I'm not the only one who has asked that question.
Yeah, and then you're a horrible person for saying no.
What if I don't ever want to have children? Surely I'm not the only one who has asked that question. Reading around? Clearly not. I found an article written by journalist Holly Brockwell in 2015 describing how she was finding it hard to get sterilised as a woman in her 20s.
Usually if I say I don't want kids, the first question is, why not? But it's said in a tone of voice that means, why would you possibly not want this thing, you know, kind of.
Like, what's wrong with you? You couldn't possibly have happiness without that, right?
Why not? But it's said in a tone of voice that means, why would you possibly not want this thing? You know, kind of what's wrong with you?
Right.
You don't get people saying, we're trying for children. And people go, but why? The first few times I asked about sterilisation, it was pretty much like I said, I wanted to grow a second head. The doctors, male and female, just looked at me like I was completely bonkers. Like they'd
I think my cousin had a hard time asking about having her tubes tied.
never been asked this before, ever, and as if there was no hope in hell of me ever getting that done, not just at the age of 26 as I was then, but into my 30s. It took 4 years from when I first asked to when I was able to eventually get my tubes tied, and even then it felt like it was touch and go, like I could revoke permission at any time. It was really scary. And I think the hardest thing through that entire time was that I got pregnant accidentally. I'd done everything right contraceptive-wise, and it just happened anyway, as it does, I guess, to some people. And it was particularly frustrating for me because I felt like if they'd just listened to me the first 10 times, the first 15 times I'd asked for this procedure, I would not have had to go through the absolutely miserable experience that I did.
And we're still dealing with the topics of not having full control or full say-so over our own reproductive rights. That's a whole other issue, but trying to convince a doctor that you want and what you need and what you've already thoroughly thought about is got to be frustrating on so many levels.
For this procedure, I would not have had to go through the absolutely miserable experience that I did. In the end, I had a miscarriage, natural miscarriage, quite early on, which I guess you could say was lucky, but it just felt awful. It felt like I'd wished this child out of existence, like I'd done something to my body that made it feel unwelcome, and from my experience with feeling not wanted by my mum, I felt awful about that.
One of the things that plays on my mind is the ticking of the dreaded biological clock. Women are born with a fixed number of eggs in their ovaries, normally around 2 million. By the age of 37, there's only 25,000 left. It means I don't have that much longer to make my decision. But unlike women who had to fight for the right to even vote, or those who had to fulfill a stereotypical gender role, or even those who
and then still get their uteruses revoked.
Even vote, or those who had to fulfill a stereotypical gender role, or even those who finally found a sense of sexual liberation, we have never had it so good. And I'm just not sure I'm willing to give some of it up yet. That could be a factor in why globally fertility rates are falling. Technically, that means the number of children born for every woman of childbearing age in a population is going down.
Look at the world we're living in, though. Like, who can blame them?
Born for every woman of childbearing age in a population is going down. Jargon aside, the reality is that nearly half of all countries are facing a baby bust and an ageing population.
People's ideal life, people's sense of what would the good life look like, still basically means getting married, having kids. Maybe housing has gotten more expensive. Maybe childcare has gotten more expensive. Maybe it's not barriers.
Everything.
Maybe it's just competing aspirations. That people continue to say that 2.5 children and a spouse would be ideal, but there are a lot of other great things out there in the world that weren't there in the past. But what we really see is that the determinative factor is marriage. When people change how long they wait to get married, fertility changes correspondingly. Children make people happy. Period. The issue is that having children makes people happy. Paying for children does not make people happy.
And pay you will. Being a parent costs an average of £150,753 to bring up your child to the age of 18 for a couple, and £183,335 if you're a single parent. Another of my main concerns is the state of the world which my potential child will grow up in. And it turns out giving birth is the most destructive thing a person can do to the planet.
Ugh, see?
One child equals about 60 tonnes of CO2 equivalent emissions every year. That's worse than eating meat, driving a car, or travelling by plane. And even if I got over all of that, and was lucky enough to get pregnant, a child won't necessarily bring me happiness. One study has even suggested that the happiest part of the population is unmarried, child-free women.
Like me.
Me then.
Right.
But it's not as simple as that. Depending on your culture, religion, upbringing, background, you might have very different pressures put on you as a potential parent. Asma and Vanessa are both mums now, but felt pressure from their communities when they were trying to get pregnant.
There's almost like a silent time constraint they put on married couples. I think within...
Yeah, and the looks and the comments and the pressure that I was, speaking of earlier from society, families, friends, whatever, even just the storybook. I worked in the bridal and wedding industry for a really long time, and that was a very small portion of the reason why I decided to leave.
A silent time constraint they put on married couples. I think within, well, probably as soon as you walk down the aisle, back down the aisle and you're married, They already start looking down to see if you're pregnant. It's very pronatalist, a very pronatalist community in terms of the black community with women. I think there's just this belief. It's almost like it goes in stages. There's almost an expectation that you will obviously go through higher education or go through university, get a good job. Next thing is get married and then also have kids. And I think what's missing from that is that isn't so plain sailing with every couple. So I think within particular cultures, that it really is a big thing. I think there's status involved in being a mother.
We had been married for 2 years at that time, and then people's expectation was, when are you having kids? You don't want kids. Is that because you're working? Is that because you're too busy? And so,
or like you have to have a reason. I had a little family member come to me and tell me I'm too small, I might have complications, and all these things she had to say, and I was like, honey, you don't need any reason. You don't need any reason at all, just because it's your choice, and you don't have to have a reason to tell people. You don't even have to tell people why. Screw them.
when are you having kids? You don't want kids. Is that because you're working? Is that because you're too busy? And so forth. And at first you just shrug it off and you think, it's down to my husband and I, and we're trying, and it's not happening. But the more you hear from people, and then you see family members with kids as well, and it really, really starts to hit home.
I wanted to speak to someone who has had children and now questions that decision.
Having children means less opportunity, less fun, less freedom, less money, less sex.
Corinne Mayer has written a book called No Kids, 40 Good Reasons Not to Have Children, and it contains chapters like The Parent's Worst Nightmares and Your Kid Will Always Disappoint You.
I'm a quite happy person by my own, so I know where my happiness is and I don't need others to find it.
Yes, I say this all the time, and I spent my whole life being obsessed with the fact that I had to have kids. I wanted a baby so bad. Until recently, I'm like, I better find another source of this elusive happiness, right? I better find another thing to be happy for.
I know where my happiness is and I don't need others to find it. In fact, I didn't need my children to find happiness. Now that they are grown-ups, I'm a quite happy person. I don't see them very often and I think it's great. I have less problem. I know where my freedom is. Having to care for people is a huge burden. I'm more selfish, and I'm very proud to say that being selfish sometimes is a very good thing.
Well, and knowing it and being able to admit it is a healthy relationship with your own selfishness. You know what I mean? It's when you deny it or can't identify it that it becomes toxic for other people. So I appreciate that.
To say that being selfish sometimes is a very good thing.
To be honest, I found what Corinne said really refreshing. She was completely honest about what she wanted to do and not what was expected of her. But to be a child of someone who regrets you is far from easy.
My mum has been pretty open and vocal about the fact that she didn't want children. She said she never wanted them. She's basically regretted it ever since, which I understand on a logical level isn't my fault, but on an emotional level it does feel sometimes like you should apologise for existing. I do feel guilty for all the things she hasn't been able to do and all the dreams she hasn't been able to chase.